Level 989.
Welcome to 989 on Health, where you don't need years of university to understand the latest news about health and related subjects. As always, we've created a list of helpful links on today's topic at our website, level989.com, and those same links should also be visible in your podcast playing app of choice.
This is an informal discussion sharing our personal viewpoints on health and wellness. Don't rely on the information in this podcast as an alternative to medical advice from a professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website.
I'm Mike Davalos, just a guy, your average Joe, and I'm joined by the opposite of average, Brandon Weintraub, a primary care physician. Good morning, Brandon.
Good morning, Mike.
Our topic for today is, well, actually we're going to get a little crazy and cover two mini topics in one episode. Keep in mind, just because we keep a topic short doesn't mean it's not worthy of being covered in more depth. These topics might end up revisited with their own individual episodes someday.
So, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, it won't be a surprise since you're going to be able to read the episode title and know the topics. First up is something called Saliva Therapy. According to a whole series of articles and blog posts spanning decades, there appear to be surprising healing properties in saliva. There's a lot of chatter about this online. Now, Brandon, before we get too far into this, have you heard about saliva therapy before researching for today's episode?
I absolutely hadn't. I'd heard stories like, dogs lick their wounds and it accelerates healing, but I'd never thought anyone would try to apply saliva in a human treatment.
According to the hype, saliva therapy can help with everything from acne to dry eyes to burns on your skin. I guess before we go any further, we need to get more specific. What exactly is saliva? I mean, I thought it was mostly water.
Well, in fact, saliva is mostly water, but argumentatively, so is blood. In fact, Chinese medicine considers saliva and blood to be closely related and come from the same general source. Even though saliva looks like little more than water, it also contains various electrolytes, mucus, and enzymes.
Some of the references I came across specifically recommended morning saliva. Is there any real difference between average moment of the day saliva and morning saliva? Maybe morning saliva might be a little thicker? Definitely smellier.
Research tends to be a little mixed on the subject. There may be differences in the morning and specific substances within the saliva, levels of cortisol, or certain enzymes. But these differences may be a sign of a disease process like metabolic syndrome, or an imbalance in the body, like a candida overgrowth.
What's a candida?
Candida is a variety of yeast, and potentially the most common cause of fungal infections worldwide.
So is there any science to back up the claims that saliva can be beneficial beyond moistening my food on its way down my gullet?
Of course. In fact, in 2008, some researchers in the Netherlands conducted an experiment to find out whether saliva actually had healing properties, and also to find out if they could isolate the substance responsible for any healing properties that they did find.
Okay, so what did they discover?
Well, basically what you'd expect since we're discussing it right now, that the artificial skin lesions they created in their tests, which were epithelial, or skin cells, from inside the mouth grown on a plate. They regrew more quickly when saliva was introduced to the sample. And after they reduced the saliva into its basic components, they found substances called histidines seemed to be responsible.
Now, I used to work at a pharmaceutical company, and one of the important things I learned is that preparations intended for the eye must be kept sterile. The idea of putting saliva on eyes, even my own spit on my own eyes, is directly counter to that. My spit ain't sterile. So would you recommend putting saliva on our eyes?
Oh goodness. So, after all the reading I did for this podcast, I was surprised to find that not only has saliva been used successfully to treat severe conditions of dry eye, but that in specific instances, there's even a surgery that relocates a saliva gland so that it will automatically moisten the eyeball.
And that means that you do recommend saliva for eye treatments?
It means I think we ought to make something clear. The components of saliva aren't what creates a lack of sterility. It's the introduction of saliva into the mouth that causes it to be less than ideal for many of the uses we're going to discuss. So, I don't suggest the use of saliva for treatment of eye conditions. While it may be true that saliva has antibacterial or healing properties, saliva once introduced into the mouth also contains a whole host of other bacteria that may be okay when in the mouth, but not quite so okay if introduced to your eyes. There may be extreme cases where saliva application is appropriate, but this would only be safe if the saliva was utilized before its introduction into the mouth.
So what about putting saliva on wounds, acne, burns? What could it really hurt? What's the worst thing that could happen? It seems to work fine for dogs. Bring out those research studies. I know you're having trouble holding back. Come on, spit it out.
I just don't know. I'm so torn. A part of me finds it extremely difficult to recommend using saliva as a frontline treatment for any condition. That said, saliva has actually been used for some time in India as a reportedly successful method of treating acne. And burns in the mouth do tend to heal faster than most other injuries. So, I guess, as long as there are no open wounds and the condition isn't severe, saliva could be a treatment option worth exploring.
So why not open wounds? If we accept that saliva has healing properties, wouldn't licking a cut be a good idea?
Not so much. We end up having concern about the mouth's bacteria content again. When applied to unbroken skin, the threat of infection is reduced, but an open wound is a perfect environment for those bacteria to grow and cause problems. A bite wound from a human carries an intense risk of infection. Why present that opportunity when you don't have to?
We'll put a few links in the show notes. There are definitely instances where severe infections occurred from putting saliva on even small wounds. Based on what I've learned, I will not be risking it.
I'm right there with you.
I really don't know when we'll be discussing saliva specifically again, so I'm going to slip this one in here. This next bit might sound a bit silly, but there's other times when saliva plays a role in life beyond eating. Everything from a passionate kiss to a wet willy. That's a saliva-moistened finger that you stick in someone else's ear, for anyone who doesn't know. And there are even times during, other sorts of physical intimacy where saliva is sometimes used as a lubricant. This actually seems to be a pretty common thing that folks do. Studies demonstrate this. So what does science say about the safety of these uses of saliva?
This line of questioning took an unexpected turn, but it's a good question. Overall, saliva is considered relatively safe. As long as your partner doesn't have open sores and isn't actively sick, application of saliva to the more sensitive areas of the anatomy is just fine.
Are there any risks at all associated with saliva as a lubricant?
In specific instances, there can be. In a study published in the journal Sexually Transmitted Infections, it was found that partners who used saliva as a lubricant during anal sex were 2 times as likely to have rectal gonorrhea.
Yikes! So no more using saliva, right?
Well, actually, that's a step too far. The author of the journal entry included a note which read, and I quote, "It is likely that the public health message from our findings is complicated and involves more than simply recommending that saliva is not used as a lubricant for anal sex."
So as always, more research is needed, and no one ever wants to say anything definitive. Any other concerns we ought to know about?
Well, I've heard that some people were concerned that saliva could affect a couple's chances of becoming pregnant. Initially, I passed it off as improbable, but according to an article in Healthline, in cases where infertility is a concern, large amounts of saliva has been found to decrease sperm motility. While it isn't a problem for most couples, if you're experiencing difficulty conceiving, it might be worthwhile to explore different lubrication options.
Any last thoughts on saliva therapy before we move on to our next topic?
Saliva as a treatment seems weird to me, which I imagine is the case for most of our listeners who grew up in a more Western society. Just because it seems odd doesn't mean there isn't some viability in there. And I'd be willing to bet that's an outlook worth holding on to for the remainder of our topics today. Used in the right situations, there are plenty of modalities that can make a huge difference in a patient's life.
A few weeks ago, when I mentioned our next topic for today, you were under the impression that ASMR, or Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, was a form of therapy. I have to admit, I slightly tricked you there.
Yeah, you did, but the joke's on you. ASMR is actually being studied for potential therapeutic applications, so ha!
Okay, I allowed you to be misled is more accurate, but you love learning. Now that you've actually researched it, tell our listeners, what is ASMR?
ASMR is a sensory phenomenon during which a person experiences a tingling, static-like sensation. It's usually felt across the scalp or the back of the neck, but can be experienced almost anywhere in the body. That tingly sensation is often reported to be accompanied by a general sense of relaxation and well-being.
That sounds pretty cool. So how do people indulge in this sensory experience? Are there electrodes, some kind of high-tech headband?
That's actually what makes autonomous sensory meridian responses so interesting. ASMR is often triggered by, and I'm being serious, specific types of sounds or visual patterns.
Well, I'm going to need some examples as to how this works. This is going to be some kind of high-tech sound you can only find in a special laboratory, right?
I never guessed you were going to want examples. Let me grab my pre-prepared list. Among the most common triggers seem to be whispering and repetitious noises like those of an airplane engine. A wonderfully sizable, that's my opinion, group of people report experiencing ASMR as a result of lightsaber sound effects made famous in the science fiction powerhouse called Star Wars.
When I first learned about all this, I seem to remember other possible triggers besides just sounds. Did you run across anything else that might be a common trigger?
In fact, I did. Although the study mentions them as less common triggers, slow movements, and in some cases, focused attention, think a kind of meditation technique, were also capable of causing an autonomous sensory meridian response.
So, no drugs required, and even without them, I could listen to a sound and experience a pleasant, tingling sensation and possibly relax as a result. It sounds almost too good to be true, but I would swear I've heard of something like this in the past.
I had the same thought when you sent me your initial articles, and it turns out we're both right. We have. ASMR is being discussed alongside auditory tactile synesthesia. I'll pause for your question.
You knew I was going to ask there, sir. Anytime you use big words to describe a condition, you know I'm going to have to stop you and ask you for some plain-spoken clarity. So, go ahead.
Synesthesia is, well, it's more recently being defined as a neurological disorder, which leads to the perception of one type of sensory experience via a separate and independent sensory pathway.
Okay. That didn't help much. Give me a simple example.
That's fair enough. If a person were to, for example, see a letter of the alphabet and experience that letter as possessing its own color, the letter A was always red while the letter B was always blue, that would be a form of synesthesia. There are a remarkable variety of synesthesias. Synesthesiae? Synesthesies? I'm going to go with synesthesias. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more, I'll make sure a few links get posted at level989.com.
So you said ASMR has been associated with
auditory tactile synesthesia. Essentially, sounds generate the sensation of touch. For example, certain music may be perceived as textures. I almost imagine something like Braille without the physical patterns of bumps. That's just how I envision it. Some of the articles I read portray a much greater depth of tactile experiences.
That sounds like a pretty good match for your definition of autonomous sensory meridian response. But why does it have its own specific term?
Well, as I understand it, auditory tactile synesthesia is considered as one of the rarer forms of synesthesia. And that's saying something, since synesthesias as a whole are estimated, in more modern studies, to occur in only 4% of the population.
4%? It's still way higher than I would have guessed. Imagine you're on an airplane with 100 people total. At a 4% rate, we can imagine the 4 flight attendants would be our synesthetes. Synesthetes. That's an awkward word. Sounds like they're athletes whose sport is doing wicked things. But when you scale it up from 4 in 100 to 40,000 people in a group of 1 million, it starts to get more impressive. And with 7 billion people on the planet, that means what, around 300 million people are these wicked athletes. I'm surprised.
I was surprised too. The initial estimates were much lower, less than 0.05% in fact, but that's modern research for you. There are several reasons that ASMR is labeled separately. The first being the regularity with which it's found is well above even the most generous estimate found for synesthesia, which has led to it being considered a separate phenomenon. Although...
I somehow knew there was an although or a but coming up. You've been way too forthcoming so far today.
I'm sorry, I was doing pretty well. I was just going to say that recent findings are actually leading some researchers to think that our estimates and definitions for synesthesia may need re-examination.
It's interesting that more people might have synesthesia than we thought. I just find it hard to imagine that there are millions of people out there who experience things like tasting words without there being a lot more conversations about it. I guess if you've grown up with it, though, it might just be something you assume everyone can or does do. It just doesn't come up in conversation. You mentioned other reasons ASMR might not be considered specifically as a type of synesthesia.
Honestly, it could be nothing more than the fact that ASMR is such a recent arrival to both the research community and the general populace. With so many new people now reporting their experiences, it would be natural to label it as its own individual event.
So in a few years, what we're chatting about today might just be another way of describing a subcategory of synesthesia. I get it.
It's possible, but keep in mind I first heard about ASMR when you mentioned it as a possible podcast topic, so I'm not perfectly versed in how Western practitioners and researchers are defining these things.
No, that's okay. We all know a lot of the Western medical terms used to define syndromes and illnesses are completely different from how you would describe things from a Chinese medical perspective. We're not going to hold any misunderstandings against you. And I think you're doing very well being so new to the topic, especially having discussed it within a medical framework. When I first heard about ASMR, it came up as part of a random conversation I had, like, have you heard about this weird new thing? And the gist of that person's anecdote seemed to describe ASMR as being something naughty or something of a fetish. Example, maybe a fetish like baby talk during foreplay or something similar. Let's be clear, that's not what ASMR is, just the tone of how I first heard about it. Obviously, anything can be made naughty, anything can be fetishized, but ASMR, as you've defined it, doesn't seem to be inherently sexually suggestive or risque. What do you think?
From what I've gathered through my reading, it isn't terribly surprising to me that your introduction to the topic was sexually themed. Around 5% of the people who have experienced ASMR and have discussed their sensations have apparently related the things they felt to orgasm in some way. Frankly, much of the content online that isn't related to official research, like internet discussion boards, is about how to use various audio or visual cues to create an orgasm-like sensation without other stimulus. Let's face it, sex certainly catches people's attention, so it makes sense for ASMR to have entered common discussion with a sexual connotation.
Okay, now this situation is kind of cool, because ASMR is a topic that we can actually experiment with, unlike most of our topics. Since you didn't know about ASMR before this, it seems pretty clear that you've never experienced it.
I've never experienced ASMR as far as I know, and I think I see where this is headed. You're definitely right. The most common triggers of ASMR are not only clearly defined, but easily accessible.
Exactly. So, if you would, I know as part of your podcasting setup, you've got your headphones on. So, how about you go on over to this handful of links I just sent you and have a listen. Observe your reactions to each one. Come right back to give us a report. Now, some of these are kind of long. In fact, one of them is 10 hours long. So I don't expect you to listen to them all the way through, but maybe give each one just 2 minutes.
I think I can handle that. Any last thoughts before I, and hopefully a few of our audience members, go and have a listen?
Well, you could be careful of the volume setting until the actual video starts. These videos are all about soft, gentle sounds, but sometimes the random movie trailer commercial that automatically plays before all the soothing happens can be a bit jarring. Not to make a sound joke, but that sort of discontinuity is a bit tone deaf if you ask me. Oh, people are here to be relaxed? Let's play some chainsaw and machine gun sounds to get them in the mood. But once the actual video starts, you might want to turn it up a bit. It's supposed to be as if the other person is right there, kind of whispering in your ear.
That's a good point. All right, here I go. Be right back.
All right, everyone. While Brandon's listening, you might consider checking out the ASMR links we've provided, either in your podcast playing app or at our website, level989.com, and listen to what Brandon's listening to. Now, I'm no ASMR enthusiast, so please don't expect these links I found to represent the cream of the crop in ASMR examples. They were just the top hits I came across when I searched for ASMR on YouTube. I'm sure whatever your own special poison is, you can find the right flavor out there if you look for it.
Okay, I'm back.
Hello again. So I gave you a list of 4 links. Let's break them down one by one. I'm going to hold my own results for the end since I don't want to influence you. Now, the first one was a relaxing doctor exam. I choose that one especially for you. What was your reaction to that one? Just before you start, I'm not looking for you to critique her stethoscope technique. Just how did the audio make you feel?
Frankly, a little uncomfortable. Although I definitely got a general sense of what ASMR feels like at a couple of points, the combination of the breathy whisper and the vaguely medical terminology actually made me feel more anxious rather than less.
Okay, noted. Now, next up was the crinkling video. Now, I know I said I was going to hold my opinions to the end, but I have some very strong aversion to crinkling sounds. They make you want to hit someone, preferably the person making the crinkling noise. So the crinkling one was definitely not for me. How did you feel about the crinkling? Were you stimulated?
This one was much better for me. I don't have the same aversion to crinkling sounds unless I'm at the movie theater, so maybe that's why it worked better for me. I definitely felt the occasional electrical sensation at the top of my head, which propagated downward toward my neck.
Cool. Oh, all right, next was the gentle whispering. How did that one grab you?
I didn't like that one either. This may have been my least favorite, and the one I reacted to the least, at least so far. I think there's something about the idea of some random young woman whispering in my ear that makes me uncomfortable. Enough so that it places my attention more on the vague sensations of unease than on the possible experience of ASMR.
And last of all was the tapping and rubbing video. Did that one tap into your psyche?
Of all 4 of the examples you provided, this one was the best. I don't know if the sound equipment the gentleman was using was better than the others, or if his technique was better. Maybe it was just that I responded best to tapping sounds. From the moment the video started and the tapping began, I could legitimately feel the sounds down the sides of my head and feel the electrical buzzing all the way down my spine. It was pretty intense, and I will say that I feel a little less stressed after having listened to that clip, which I needed after listening to all that whisper talking.
Okay, that's all 4. Hopefully all of our audience will have had a chance to listen to at least a couple of the clips that we've linked to.
If we've got the time, I'd like to introduce one more into the mix. I mentioned earlier that the sound of a lightsaber from Star Wars is often reported to create ASMR. I've provided the link. Give it a listen and tell me what you think. I'll be honest, it's a toss-up for me which creates the most physical sensation.
All right, I'll go have a listen. And thanks to the magic of editing, I'm back. You've done it, Brandon. The lightsaber was the sound that went directly into the yowza sensor of my brain and just lit it up. Within 5 seconds, I immediately felt tingles and chills and a bit giddy, and I have to admit I let out a few involuntary laughing sounds. I feel this sensation very rarely. It's been a couple of times during a really good massage, and once during acupuncture. I believe you were the practitioner on that one. I've always had an affinity for the lightsaber sound, and there were no awkward associations I can make, so I'm free to just enjoy the sensations.
That was fun. More of our episodes should have interactivity.
If you promise to be a good acupuncture physician, maybe we can make that happen. You know, ASMR seems to be about attention. To me, there's 2 types of focused attention a person can give. One is a nurturing, parental attention where there's no innuendo to it. You might be softly murmuring to and tenderly stroking your dog's tummy or your own child's tummy. There's no premeditated end game beyond family members bonding. It reduces stress, strengthens connections. Yeah?
I'm with you so far.
And then there's the flirting, enticing, toying, teasing that even monogamous couples play with. I know we're going to get frisky tonight. You know it. Let's make a game of it. All coy, petting, winking, whispering, a tickle here, a pat there, building up anticipation. Now, as a socially awkward geek before geeks were accepted, I never had the sexual escapades a lot of people seem to. So proximity is still something that makes me anxious. There are very few people I can comfortably maintain eye contact with. So the whole ASMR thing, where it's usually a pretty girl murmuring, whispering, all breathy in my ear, I just don't have the experience or the context to process that in any other way than sexual, even if she's just talking about a trip to the bank. Also, since I'm not particularly attractive or appealing, I've never been flirted with in real life. So as I listen to the talking type ASMR videos, my mind somehow on some level gets all suspicious and defensive and goes to, what's this girl's agenda? Because it's not like I'm handsome or wealthy, so she must have lost a bar bet, or she's playing some joke on me, or she wants to set me up to kill her husband and take the fall for it. There would have to be some ulterior motive. I guess that says some sad things about me, but there it is. All that to say that the soft whispering ASMR really doesn't get me all tingly. If I'm honest, it makes me about 5% turned on and about 95% uncomfortable. Maybe if I gave it more time, I would work through the discomfort eventually and just learn to go with the flow. I don't know. Overall, how did the ASMR make you feel? Will you be going back for more?
Well, I can't say I was turned on by any of the audio we listened to, but as I mentioned not long ago, the whispering and talking clips definitely gave me a vaguely uncomfortable feeling as well. I've never been exposed to much whispering. I'm an old man, and if you want me to hear what you're saying, you'd better be enunciating clearly and projecting, Sonny Jim. However, I have to admit I enjoyed the non-verbal triggers, tapping, crinkling, science fiction laser sword. There was definitely an unusual sensation that accompanied them all, and if it could potentially let me perceive less stress, I'd definitely go back for more.
You mentioned at the very start of this part of the podcast that ASMR is being researched for its possible use as a form of therapy. What can you tell us about what's been found so far?
Unfortunately, very little has been discovered, at least officially so far. In a couple of small batch research studies, ASMR has been found to create a reduction in overall stress levels in a majority of the participants, but the precise mechanisms and how useful or long-term this effect might be is still very much unknown. As a topic of legitimate study goes, ASMR is still in its infancy. I'm really hoping that research continues in a positive direction, though. ASMR is such an easy thing to create, relatively, I mean. After all, it requires little more than the appropriate audio clip and a good set of headphones. That means almost every home in America could have a potential treatment to use for simple mental emotional relief.
Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up?
I think ASMR could have a great potential as a very basic tool to provide both insight into the workings of the human brain, as well as a way to provide basic relief against the daily stress we accumulate. I will definitely be keeping an eye out for more studies and details on ASMR.
Nicely done. Make sure to keep us up to date.
Anybody who's interested in Mike and Brandon's Personal Health Goals Corner should stick around and listen after the music.
That's all the time we have for today. These short episodes are a brief overview of very complex topics. Everything we say is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Licensed healthcare professionals should advise you and be aware of changes you're planning to make to any aspect of your healthcare. Every person's needs are different. The links to references we've made about news articles, medical studies, or other materials can be found at level989.com, along with our contact information and a complete Don't Take Medical Advice from Podcasts disclaimer. Don't forget to take a moment to rate or review us in iTunes or give us a mention on social media. We can't inform everyone if they don't know we exist. Thanks for listening, and now go health yourself. All right, Brandon, it's been about 2 weeks since we last took a look at our own health, and I have to admit I have made zero progress. I have nothing to report. I am lazy. Hopefully, you have something interesting to say about your own progress.
Well, I don't know how interesting it is. As our listeners probably know by now, I hit a plateau a few months ago in terms of my weight loss and fitness goals. I had managed to lose a fair amount of weight, and I'm now stuck kind of at around 180 pounds, more or less. And my previous methods, improving my diet and increasing the intensity of my cardio workouts, just aren't helping anymore. So, I've decided that my lack of ongoing progress is now due to inadequate muscle mass. As most of our listeners have probably heard, muscle burns more energy than fat. So I've switched over to a more strength training focused exercise regimen. Over the past 2 weeks, I've managed to increase the total number of push-ups, crunches, and pull-ups I'm able to do. Not by a lot, maybe an increase of 10 total repetitions for each. So, yay! I have, however, also increased in weight by about 4 pounds. Is it an increase due to water retention? Increased hunger due to increased exercise? I know my caloric intake hasn't changed, so I'm still trying to work this out. My runs have decreased a little bit in frequency. I'm doing about 3 runs a week, between 3 to 5 miles each time. So I guess I'm going to have to see how things shape up as we continue going forward. Now that I've blathered on for such a long time, are you sure you don't have anything to report? Come on, we're trying to inspire our listeners along their own journeys to better health.
Well, while I haven't made any actual progress, I have made an important decision. I've actually made the decision to go join the gym. And when I decide, it's a done deal. But there's going to be other humans there, Brandon.
Hooray! I know I've been prodding you to join a gym for a little while now, so what caused the sudden decision? And what do you think is going to change as a result?
Well, I just kept putting off buying a new piece of fitness equipment for the home, but hopefully going to the gym I can continue to eat crummy food, but this time I'll burn it off.
Nuh-uh. You know better than that, sir. Give us the real details here.
Yeah, I don't actually eat that much junk, but I hope to burn off more of what I do eat and then reassess.
I prefer to think about exercise as using the energy you provide more efficiently, rather than to look at it as a way to burn off what you've eaten. Too many times it becomes an excuse to eat another slice of cake. Oh, I'll burn that off later. But I get the gist of what you're saying. Have you set yourself a goal for your initial gymming experience to know that you're making progress?
A goal? For right now, it's getting my butt up and out of the house and actually sign up for a gym membership. And then go and exercise for an hour, at least 5 days a week. That's what I did back in California.
I think that's a great goal. We will all look forward to hearing your success story at the end of next episode.
Great. Accountability. Just what I needed? Okay, that wraps up Health Corner. I know a lot of folks out there are working hard on their own health goals, so let us know if there's anything that works especially well for you that we should try. You'll find an easy contact form at level989.com/contact. Bye for now.